according to what they see as reasonable in fact, that congruence between what they see as reasonable and what they actually do is a different issue, a very important issue, demanding further analysis. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what exactly they should see as reasonable and for what particular reason. The reason justification for social action is a big issue in political philosophy. And theories of justice have tended to be based on some presumption that all persons can gain from a social contract that goes about setting up a just system. The arguments for this way of seeing things were clearly presented by Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and these arguments, based on cooperative grounds for mutual benefit, have been centrally important in one form or another in mainstream political philosophy of justice from those days and remain so today. But the big difference that John Rawls made to that approach was to start from the demands of fairness to arrive at his principles of justice. This he did through the device of a hypothetical, quote-unquote, original position, an imagined primordial equality, when the parties involved have no knowledge of their respective personal identities within the group as a whole. They have to choose under this veil of ignorance, that is, ignorance specifically about their own personal interests and particular desires, what exact rules should govern the society that they are, as it were, about to, quote-unquote, create. Rawls tries to get rid of selfish reasoning in the deprivation of principles of justice through a hypothetical exercise, but the overwhelming motivation is to harvest the mutual benefit from cooperation in that imagined original position. There is a situational prudence, as some people might call it, that becomes the basis of ethics, as it were, here. There are several difficulties with this approach, some of which I'll discuss later on in this talk, but the idea of mutual obligation for social cooperation because of joint benefit has certainly become the central point of concentration in mainstream theories of justice. The question is this right? There is actually another type of reasoning that does not focus on benefits of cooperation, at least not exclusively, and which has been relatively neglected in ongoing political philosophy. It is based on the argument that if someone had the power to make a change that he or she can see will reduce injustice in the world, then there is a strong social argument for doing just that, without having to dress all this up in terms of some imagined cooperative benefit enjoyed by all, including by the powerful person. This obligation of effective power, as I call it, contrasts with the mutual obligation for cooperation at the basic plane of motivational justification. The point was made with clarity by Gautam Buddha 2,500 years ago in a document not widely read called Sutta Nipata. Buddha was arguing that we have responsibility to animals precisely because of the asymmetry between us, not because of any symmetry that takes us to the need for cooperation and to a contractarian solution. He argued that since we are enormously more powerful than the other species, we have, by virtue of that power, some responsibility towards other species that links exactly with that asymmetry. Buddha went on to illustrate the point by an analogy with the responsibility of the mother towards her child, not because she has given birth to the child. That connection is not invoked in this particular argument. There is room for it elsewhere. But because she can do things, the mother, can do things to influence the child's life that the child itself cannot do. The mother's reason for action is not guided by the rewards of cooperation, but precisely from her recognition that she can asymmetrically do things for the child effectively that will make a huge difference to its life. Mabov's understanding of social obligation has something of this feature of responsibility of effective power. He was impatient. I've noticed that feature from his undergraduate days. He was impatient with having to give any reason to someone to do something that the person can see will yield social betterment, as if an indirect justification is needed in terms of showing that it will benefit him or her as well. I do not have time to pursue the richness of this line of reasoning, but I will quickly make 2 points that may be pursued on some later occasion, even maybe in the HDCA at some stage. First, the understanding of obligations related to the human rights approach have always had a strong element of this kind of social reasoning, linked with the responsibility of effective power. I presented that diagnosis in my essay, Elements of a Theory of Human Rights in Philosophy and Public Affairs in 2004. For example, both Tom Paine and Mary Wollstonecraft's writings on what Wollstonecraft called vindication of the rights of women and men drew a great deal on this type of motivation derived from reasoning from the obligation of effective power. Second, capability is a kind of power, and it would be a mistake to see capability only as a concept of human advantage, not also as a central concept in human obligation. It should be noticed, incidentally, that this consideration yields a huge contrast between happiness and capability as basic informational ingredients in rival theories of justice, since happiness does not generate obligation in the way that capability inescapably must do if the responsibility of effective power is taken seriously. I tried to say something on all this in my long time ago, 1984, Dewey Lectures, also in New York, but at a different university at Columbia, which came out in the Journal of Philosophy in '85 under the title Well-Being, Agency, and Freedom. The connections have to be more fully explored, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do in the Reasons of Justice. I turn now to the third feature, namely the focus on comparative issues and the assessment of justice. The comparative question concentrates on how to make society more just, rather than speculating about the nature and the demands of the perfectly just society. Mahbub was never interested in exploring the nature of a perfectly just society, which is the central exercise in what we may call the transcendental view of justice. At least I call it that in a Journal of Philosophy article last year called What Do We Want from a Theory of Justice? I know that people whom I'm characterizing like that did not like that term at all, just hated it. But I think it couldn't be because it's not accurate. Mahbub's deliberations were all aimed at exploring ways and means of making the world less unjust than it is, not at chasing some idea of a perfectly just society. In contrast, the transcendental issue is seen as a predominant question in the theory of justice in contemporary political philosophy. In fact, it is sometimes taken to be the only question that deserves patient exploration in that literature. The shared starting point in most of the modern theories of justice is the identification of the demands of quote-unquote a just society and the nature of quote-unquote just institutions. The exercise begins by asking, what is a just society? And related to that, what are the principles on the basis of which just institutions could be set up for the society? Indeed, in most theories of justice in contemporary political philosophy, these questions about impeccably just societies and exactly just institutions occupy the center stage, with little on the periphery. The transcendental approach to justice is, of course, not new. It can be traced at least to the 17th century writings of Thomas Hobbes, including in Leviathan, but recent contributions have done much to consolidate the reliance on this approach. In his investigation of justice as fairness, Rawls explores in depth the nature of an entirely just society seen in the perspective of fairness. Even those political philosophers who have taken a different approach to the demands of justice from Rawls, for example, my friend Robert Nozick, who differs whom I miss also greatly, since he died a few